In the heart of a frozen Montana night, a bobcat moved against the snow. She was no ordinary predator. She dragged herself forward without front legs, leaving a broken trail behind. Each breath rose like smoke, harsh and shallow in the bitter air. Her eyes burned with something more than hunger, an urgency, a plea. Snow clung to her whiskers, scars marked her body, yet still she pressed on. Not for herself, but for the fragile lives hidden in the dark beyond the trees. And within that silence of winter, a secret waited to be revealed. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable animal stories. The storm had rolled in faster than anyone expected. By the time Claire Dawson finished her late shift at the small veterinary clinic in Aspen Ridge, Colorado, the town was wrapped in a blanket of white. Streetlights glowed dimly through the swirling snow, their beams breaking into hazy cones of gold. The wind carried the sharp bite of pine and wood smoke, the kind of air that cut through even the thickest coat. Claire tugged her scarf higher, wishing she was already home with her dog curled at her feet and a pot of soup warming on the stove. It had been a long day, the kind that left her shoulders heavy. Shots, checkups, and a surgery that had stretched well past sunset. She was more than ready for rest. Locking the clinic door behind her, she exhaled, her breath clouding in front of her like a small ghost. The lot was nearly empty except for her old pickup, parked crooked in the corner. Snow had already piled along its hood and windshield. Claire adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, boots crunching on the frozen gravel, when she noticed a shape huddled beneath the farthest street lamp. At first, she thought it was a pile of snow blown against the dumpster. But then it shifted, slowly, deliberately. A head lifted, catching the flickering light. Two pale eyes fixed on her with startling intensity. Her steps faltered. She froze. The figure emerged from the blur of white, dragging itself forward in a strange, halting rhythm, more a glide and lurch than a walk. As it came closer, Claire's chest tightened with disbelief. It was a bobcat, young, maybe a year old, its shoulders lean but powerful under a ragged coat. Its ears flicked in the wind, snow clinging stubbornly to the whiskers. And yet something was terribly wrong. The animal didn't prowl or leap. It didn't stalk with the predatory grace wildcats were known for. Instead, it rocked forward awkwardly, pushing with its hindquarters, balancing clumsily on its chest. Claire's eyes dropped, her heart lurching into her throat. Where there should have been strong front legs, pillars of muscle and bone, there was only the blunt sweep of fur and scar tissue. Both legs were gone, not freshly severed, but healed long ago, the skin smoothed by time. She sucked in a sharp breath, instinct warring with empathy. Every story she'd ever heard about wild encounters raced through her mind. Bobcats didn't approach people. They fled. They snarled. They hid. But this one had crossed a lot filled with human scent and light just to stand between her and her truck. Its pale eyes glowed with neither menace nor fear. Instead, they held something else, a strange, fragile plea. Claire felt the wind cut beneath her coat as she stood rooted in place. Her training echoed in her mind. Wild is wild. You don't touch what you can't save. You don't feed what you can't keep. Yet the truth of the moment pressed down on her. This animal had risked everything to come here. To her. Easy, she whispered, her voice trembling into the snow-choked silence. Her words sounded absurd, like speaking to a frightened horse in a stall. But the bobcat didn't flinch. Its breath puffed in shallow bursts, steam blossoming into the cold air and fading. It rocked closer, stopping squarely in her path, the short tail twitching with nervous rhythm. Claire's throat tightened at the sight. The determination in its posture was unmistakable. This was no accident. It was here for a reason. Her heart hammered in her chest. She raised her gloved hands slowly, palms out, signaling she meant no harm. The bobcat's ears flicked toward the sound of the wind, then flattened for a heartbeat before lifting again. Snow spiraled down between them, catching briefly in its rough coat before melting against the warmth of its body. For the first time in her career, Claire didn't feel like the professional caretaker she'd trained to be. She felt like something smaller, humbler, just another creature caught in the wild's harsh mercy. And yet, standing there under the weak hum of the lamp, she also felt something else, chosen. The bobcat held her gaze, unmoving. A broken, battered survivor, standing its ground in the open, demanding silently that she see it. Not as a threat, not as a curiosity, but as a life asking for permission to continue. The wind howled around them, tugging strands of her hair free beneath her hood. Claire swallowed hard, every instinct urging her to back away, get in the truck, drive home. But her feet refused. The weight of those pale eyes anchored her in place. And in that frozen silence, something shifted inside her. She realized she wasn't just staring at a wounded animal. She was staring at the beginning of a story that would change everything. One she hadn't asked for, but one she already knew she couldn't walk away from. Claire's breath came in short, uneven clouds as the bobcat stopped just a few feet from her boots. The animal didn't hiss, didn't growl, didn't make any move to strike. Instead, it crouched low against the snow, its body trembling with the strain of holding itself upright without its front legs. It was a position that should have screamed vulnerability, yet something in its eyes kept Claire from thinking of it as weak. Those pale green eyes were locked on her, wide and unblinking. They weren't the wild, feral eyes she expected from a predator cornered in the open. No, they were different, brimming with an almost unbearable weight of need. She had seen dogs whimper with pain, horses shiver in fear, even raccoons screech in desperation. But this was none of those things. This was silence carrying a message louder than any sound could have. Claire lowered her bag slowly onto the snow, her fingers fumbling for the trail mix she'd stashed earlier. Her heart pounded as she tore open the packet, the rustle of plastic sharp against the hush of the storm. She pinched a few pieces of dried fruit and nuts, then extended her hand carefully. The bobcat's ears twitched, its nose flaring at the faint scent. For a heartbeat, she thought it might limp forward, hungry enough to risk everything for the food. But it didn't. Instead, the bobcat shifted its weight backward, dragging itself a half step toward the line of trees beyond the lot. Then it stopped, turned its head, and stared at her again. The meaning was unmistakable. It didn't want what she was offering. It wanted her. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The bobcat's body language was insistent. Forward into the woods, pause, turn back, eyes fixed on hers. It was a beckoning, a summons. Every rational thought screamed at her to stay put. She was alone, in the middle of a storm, with no backup, no flashlight, no idea what waited in those trees. Following a wild predator, especially one in such dire shape, was reckless at best, suicidal at worst. And yet, as she met its gaze, Claire felt the same pull she'd sensed under the street lamp, a strange, undeniable sense that this wasn't random, that she was meant to see this. The bobcat dragged itself forward again, snow spraying lightly with each push of its hindquarters. It paused at the edge of the pines, then turned once more, waiting. Its breathing was labored, harsh puffs breaking into the frozen air. Claire clutched the trail mix in her palm, the pieces growing damp from the heat of her glove, forgotten. "Why me?" she murmured, almost to herself. The question vanished into the night, carried away by the moan of the wind. The bobcat didn't answer, of course. It only lowered its head slightly, as if urging her to follow before it gathered its strength and slid another few feet into the dark. Claire's stomach twisted. She thought of the countless cases she had handled at the clinic. Animals brought in too late, their stories ending in sterile rooms with soft words and quieter tears. How many times had she wished she could rewind the moment, catch the sign earlier, intervene before it was too late? And here, now, in a frozen parking lot, a wild creature was giving her that chance. A chance to step in before the ending was written. Her boots crunched as she shifted her weight, one hesitant step forward. The bobcat froze, ears flicking back. Its gaze locked on her again, and for an instant, Claire swore she saw relief flicker in those green eyes. She took another step, then another. The distance between them shrank, not in feet, but in trust. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the distant creak of tree branches under the weight of snow. It was as though the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would choose. Retreat to the safety of her truck, or follow this broken, determined creature into the unknown. The bobcat gave its answer without sound. It dragged itself once more into the pines, leaving a thin trail in the snow. When it stopped again to look back at her, its body sagging with exhaustion, Claire felt her chest tighten with a mix of fear and resolve. She had no idea what she was walking toward, but she knew with absolute certainty that if she turned away now, she would never forgive herself. She adjusted her scarf, tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, and whispered into the cold night, "All right, show me." Then she stepped off the lot and into the dark woods, following the bobcat's silent plea. The forest swallowed her in an instant. One moment Claire stood in the dim glow of the parking lot's single flickering lamp, and the next she was under the heavy silence of snow-draped pines. The light from town faded behind her, leaving only the muted crunch of her boots and the faint drag-mark trail that cut through the powder where the bobcat pulled itself forward. She kept her distance at first, half expecting the animal to vanish between the trees. But it didn't. Its movements were slow, deliberate, each pull of its body a test of strength against the biting cold. Claire's chest ached at the sight. No predator should move like that. Every inch of progress costs more than it should. And still, the bobcat pressed on, glancing back every few strides to ensure she was following. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered, breath clouding in the air. The deeper she went, the sharper the night seemed. Snow gathered on her shoulders and hair, the flakes hissing as they struck the nylon of her coat. The trees muffled the wind, yet the quiet felt heavier here, as though the woods themselves were listening. Claire's flashlight beam bobbed across branches and shadows, but she dared not shine it directly at the bobcat, afraid to break whatever fragile thread bound them together. They moved like this for several minutes, Claire following, the bobcat leading, until the ground began to slope. The animal paused, sides heaving, then dragged itself down a narrow path between two fallen trunks. Claire crouched to follow, her knees complaining against the frozen ground. The air grew denser, tinged with a faint, unmistakable smell, musk, fur, and something faintly metallic. Her pulse quickened. She knew that scent from the clinic, from kennels, from barns. It was the smell of animals huddled too long together, the smell of need. The bobcat pushed ahead, weaker now, tail twitching for balance. Claire's throat tightened as she realized what this meant. It wasn't just asking her to feed it. It was leading her to something more, something it couldn't carry alone. At the bottom of the slope, a thicket of cedar trees formed a kind of hollow, shielded from the worst of the wind. The bobcat dragged itself to the edge, then stopped. It turned its head, met Claire's eyes, and gave the smallest nod of its muzzle toward the shadows beneath the branches. Then it sagged against the snow. Claire's heart pounded as she stepped forward, kneeling carefully to peer inside. At first she saw only tangled branches, the dim outline of rocks. Then her breath caught. There, huddled against each other in the hollow, were two tiny shapes. Fur matted, eyes still closed, bodies trembling from the cold. Bobcat kittens. Her hand flew to her mouth. The realization hit her with crushing clarity. This animal hadn't come to her for itself. It had come for them. Claire's throat tightened as she looked back at the mother. Broken, scarred, and yet somehow unyielding. Even without front legs, even with every disadvantage the wild could give, it had dragged itself into the open, found her, and led her here. Its silent plea had been for its family's survival. The cold bit deep into Claire's bones, but she barely felt it. She knew in that instant her night was no longer her own. The real journey had only just begun. For a long moment, Claire couldn't move. The sight of the tiny bobcat kittens pressed against each other in the cold hollow carved something raw and unshakable into her chest. Their frail bodies quivered with each breath, and their mewling cries barely pierced the hush of the forest. They should not have been alive in this brutal Montana winter. And yet they were, because their mother had refused to give up. Claire glanced at the adult bobcat, slumped in the snow. Its flanks rose and fell shallowly, exhaustion pulling at every breath. It had given everything, its strength, its safety, even its pride as a wild predator, just to lead a stranger here. Her throat tightened. "You trusted me," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." She dropped to her knees, ignoring the sting of frozen earth biting through her jeans. Slowly, gently, she unzipped her bag and pulled out the thermal blanket. She spread it near the hollow, coaxing the kittens onto the warmth with her gloved hands. They resisted at first, tiny claws catching on the fabric, but hunger and fatigue dulled their fight. Claire tucked them close, wrapping the edges of the blanket around their shivering bodies until they were swallowed in its fold. The mother bobcat's eyes followed every movement. Her ears twitched, her tail flicked once, but she did not lunge or protest. She simply watched, her gaze locked onto Claire's, sharp and unyielding despite the weakness pulling at her body. It was not trust so much as a demand. Do not fail them. Claire's heart hammered as she reached into her pack again and cracked open the sardine tin. The smell filled the clearing, sharp and oily. She set the tin within reach of the mother. For a moment, the animal only stared. Then, with painstaking effort, it dragged itself forward and licked at the offering. Each bite was small, deliberate, but enough to bring a faint light back into its tired eyes. Snow sifted down in steady silence, covering Claire's shoulders, the blanket, the hollow where the kittens stirred. Her breath came in short, frosted bursts as she realized what she had stepped into. This wasn't just a stray she could patch up and send back into the night. This was a family, fragile, desperate, and impossibly resilient. She looked at the kittens again, then at the mother, and felt the decision root deep inside her. Tomorrow she would call the sanctuary, pull strings at the clinic, do whatever it took. But tonight, she would not leave them. She gathered the blanket-wrapped kittens against her chest, close enough that her own body heat might keep them alive. She settled against the cedar trunk, her back aching, her knees numb, but her resolve fierce. The bobcat shifted closer, collapsing just a few feet away. It rested its scarred muzzle against the snow, still watching her with that strange, piercing gaze. No growl, no threat, just a silent agreement. Claire let her head rest back against the bark, snowflakes melting on her cheeks like tears. The forest pressed close around them, but she felt something stronger than the cold. A promise. To fight for them, as the mother had. To make sure this night, this impossible plea, was not the end but the beginning. And though no words were spoken, Claire knew the promise was understood.